Indigenous peoples and the Aborigines. Indigenous people are sometimes called First People, Tribal People, or Native People. Indigenous groups makes up about 5% of the world's population. According to the UN, there are more than 5,000 tribes of indigenous peoples in the world. They are spread out of about 90 countries. Each indigenous group is unique, yet their cultures also share some characteristics. These groups usually have a special connection to the land they live, or used to live on, and their way of life is closely tied to nature. Their ancestors lived there before colonialists or other groups invaded it. They often speak, or used to speak, their own unique language. They also tend to be a minority in their country. Many indigenous peoples have experienced that the authorities have tried to suppress or even eliminate their culture and force them to assimilate. Within the English-speaking world, there are many well-known indigenous peoples. The Native Americans, the Inuit in the Arctic, the Maori in New Zealand, and the Aboriginal people in Australia. There are also many indigenous peoples in Africa and Asia. The Sami are perhaps the most well-known indigenous group in Europe. They live in Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Russia. Then we go down to Aborigines. Aborigines. Aborigines are one of the oldest populations in the world. They migrated to Australia about 70,000 years ago. They were hunters. There were hundreds of thousands of Aborigines at the time the European settlers came to Australia. Many of them died from diseases brought by the Europeans. In the late 1800s, the Australian government started a program to remove many Aboriginal children from their families. Some thought it would be best for the children to grow up in white Christian families. Others saw this as an efficient way to assimilate the Aborigines. Land was also taken from the Aborigines, and some of the people had to work as slaves for the Europeans. As a result of these wrongs, the number of Aborigines declined and their culture suffered. Today, Aboriginal culture is reviving, and their numbers are increasing. They now make up about 2.5% of the population, but the Aborigines still suffer from many of the same social problems as indigenous groups in many other countries.